Alva has built and is building an impressive practice at this firm in some of the spaces that are most relevant to us here today: food, beverage, alcohol, and cannabis. She offers regulatory counseling, commercial contracting, investigatory, and litigation support. In other words, she's at the heart of the regulatory and legal environment surrounding the cannabis business at a time when, as our last speaker noted, it's pretty much changing all the time. So we've invited Alva here today to give us a couple of views on the regulatory situation surrounding infused brands, where things are right now, where things are pointing in the immediate future, and also what some of the gating factors will be that will affect your business sort of in the long term, in years to come, so you don't find yourself with 10 years of undeducted or unaccounted for 280E regulatory issues. So it's a tall order, and it's one that is even being rewritten as we speak in the wake of the late May FDA hearing on CBD. And so I'm going to get out of her way. She bills at a much higher rate than I do. So please welcome Alva Mather.
So hello, everyone. Oh, those lights are bright. Wow. So I'm excited to be here. I'm glad that sort of Jeff set this up as a broad stroke presentation because, as many of you know, this is a very complicated area. It's hard to try to think about covering it in 30-minute sessions or even less because I know hopefully there will be some Q&A. But I'm going to do my best to give you a sense of where are we right now? Where do I see things going? Some feedback on the FDA hearing and the like. So where we all need to start is obviously terminology. I know many of you in the room, this is basic, but from a legal perspective, particularly after the enactment of the 2018 Farm Bill, terms matter. And so we're at the Cannabis Forum, and for a long time people would just talk about cannabis, and cannabis is the plant of which marijuana and hemp are both derived. But as we all know, whether you're dealing with hemp or whether or not you're dealing with marijuana has significant consequences as far as the legality of the products that you're putting forward, the tax implications, the criminal, out there enforcement, priority risks. So, I'm a lawyer. I start with legal definitions. So just a quick, kind of reminder on where we are with marijuana. It's still, from the federal perspective, a Controlled One substance. That means it is a legal drug. It's just as illegal as cocaine, LSD. The feds have not changed their position that despite the enactment of state laws, both on the recreational side and on the medical side, that their view remains that marijuana has absolutely no medical use. And so this has implications all down the line as far as tax treatment, issues as far as, my law firm, which I didn't give my disclosure, but this is my talk. I'm not representing my law firm because my law firm, like any other service provider, is concerned when dealing with marijuana-based entities in the fact that it is true that because if we are receiving money from basically illegal businesses, that there is an analysis as far as aiding and abetting liabilities, money laundering, civil forfeiture, or potential criminal forfeiture of the funds that you receive. So despite the fact that we have great state regulations, this is the federal approach. Also, the other thing to say is that, just as a reminder, for a long time under the Obama administration, we had the enactment of the Cole Memo, which was essentially an enforcement guidelines where the Department of Justice, which is the entity that really would be responsible for enforcement actions, kind of said, look, we're a government agency. We don't have the resources to go after everybody. So long as you're compliant with state law, we're going to leave you alone. And Jeff Sessions, in his infinite wisdom, decided decided to rescind that. However, we can kind of have a whole talk, and this is the types of talks I have all the time, about enforcement risk versus legal text. And despite the recession of the Cole memo, there has not been stepped up enforcement. Now, it looks different at the state level, right? And this is one of the most interesting things as a lawyer. I've never encountered, nor am I aware of any other legal situation or entity or industry in which you have this absolute conflict between federal and state law. But, as everyone here knows, we have legalization both on the recreational side and on the medical side, which for the folks in this room, when you're thinking about THC-infused food and beverage, you're looking at that last bullet point where those are the market opportunities where, state-by-state laws have allowed for the inclusion of marijuana in food, edibles, obviously, in drinks, but those are state-by-state basis, and that doesn't, include analysis on where you're sourcing. As soon as you touch interstate commerce, which the FDA and, other federal regulators will say, basically, we live in a day and age where it's almost impossible not to touch interstate commerce, which is essentially where they get their jurisdictional hook. So, that is on the marijuana side where your opportunities lie. Hemp and hemp-based CBD, just in listening to and meeting some of the folks that are here today, the CBD market, given the passage of the Farm Bill, it has really been going gangbusters. But I think, this is my job to kind of put the brakes on and say, look, let's understand where we are. I think the last speaker had a very good point that as soon as the Farm Bill passed, every news outlet said, hemp is legal, hemp-based CBD is legal, hurrah, hurrah. Yes and no, right? So one thing that is interesting is everybody talks about the 2018 Farm Bill. What does that mean? So the bill was passed. Hemp now is legally no longer defined as a controlled one substance, and that's important because the DEA, prior to the passage of the 2018 Farm Bill, had taken a position and actually litigated that position where they said all CBD, regardless of the fact of whether or not it was coming off of the marijuana plant or whether it was coming off of the hemp plant, from their perspective, was a controlled one substance. So it was very important in drafting the 2018 Farm Bill that the drafters were very clear, if we go back to that definition, that not just all plants, all parts of the cannabis plant, but making a specific reference to CBD to be clear that now that was taken off of the controlled one substance scheduling. But so we've got this new definition. However, we have no regulations. Where we are right now is that what the Farm Bill contemplates, and we're in the process, is that we're going to have state plans for the cultivation and processing and related disposal of hemp. Those plans, some states have submitted them to the FDA, but the FDA has not approved any plans, and the FDA has not come forward with its own plan in order to give some guidance to the states. A lot of states, when I talk to them, they're not even going to put a plan forward because their perspective is, well, why would I do that? We're waiting to see what the FDA, or it's actually the USDA plan is going to look like. And so everybody's in this place right now where there really is no mechanism. There are no regulations. There are no licensed cultivators under the 2018 plan, and that's not going to change until USDA comes forward, which they're saying they're going to have those proposals out by the fall, hopefully for implementation by the end of the year. So what does that mean when you're thinking about, okay, so hemp is legal, but nobody actually today can lawfully grow hemp or do anything with it under the 2018 Farm Bill. And luckily, actually, USDA, I think last week, to Jeff's point, in putting these slides together, I feel like I have to keep going back every day and saying, okay, well, what's changed? But the USDA did come out and create some clarification that to the extent that there are any, as of today, legal sources of hemp, they have to be folks that are compliant with the previous Farm Bill, which is the 2014 Farm Bill, and that's why that's on this slide. So, talking briefly about who is licensed under the 14 bill. The 14 bill, you can see my bullet points, it was really the first foray into let's research. You're talking about agricultural research programs. They're supposed to be for institutes of higher education, really primarily for research purposes. And the text of the statute itself is that it cannot, any hemp that is grown under a 14 bill cannot be used for commercial purposes. Now, there was some litigation about whether or not state departments of ag could license. This happened in Kentucky. So there are folks who have been able to get further along in having more robust state pilot programs, which is what these were called under the 14 bill, but they're not that many, and that's one of the things that I'm going to talk about kind of at the end in terms of where we are and issues to consider. So, what we're here today to talk about is these products in food and beverage specifically. And I think probably, as many of you know, one of the, after all of that news flash on CBD is legal, the FDA came forward fairly immediately to be very clear on what their position is. And their position is, first and foremost, that one of the main things that the Farm Bill did is that while, yes, it descheduled hemp and hemp-based CBD, it explicitly stated that it retained the ability for the FDA to have jurisdiction over basically its purview, those things that fall under the Food, Drug, and Cosmetic Act, which include, by definition, food. So the FDA's position is CBD is a drug. CBD is a drug because prior to the enactment of the 2018 Farm Bill, they approved a drug called Epidiolex that is used primarily for seizures. But because they approved that drug, CBD is a drug by definition, you can see it up there, and as a result, it is an unlawful food additive for either food and beverages. And that is the FDA's position. Then it's their position now. And so from the federal perspective, all of the wonderful products that that we have, they're not legal in their view. Let's talk about the state perspective. So I've put up kind of the two states that have actually come out and been clear about are they or are they not going to follow the FDA's interpretation. And I think California and Colorado are good examples because they're also both states that have allowed for legalized marijuana. And first thing to note, and this is going to be one of the comments that I want to talk about later, is that look at who the regulatory agencies are, right? So I practice in alcohol, and I also, if you look at alcohol and you look at recreational cannabis, as it's being rolled out in states, folks are normally putting, those regulators are the same ones that were doing alcohol, and why is that? They understand the regulatory environment, they understand how to take and put controls on these types of products. That is not what's happening in hemp. Hemp is going to departments of public health, or they're going to the departments of agriculture. These are not regulatory agencies that are used to having to make these kinds of decisions. However, because of the legal definition of hemp really as an agricultural commodity product, that is where they're going. So first note, you've got both departments of health having to take positions. California has essentially said, regardless of the fact that if it was a THC product and you were going through our license structure for recreational marijuana, that you could infuse your food and beverage product because they allow for edibles. When it comes to just strict CBD or hemp-based CBD in a food and beverage product, we're going to continue to follow the FDA's guidance and not allow hemp-based CBD just in normal food and beverage products. As a footnote to that, as a result of that position coming out from the Department of Health, there is current pending legislative efforts to make that change, and from what I've heard at least, those efforts have a lot of support and hopefully will be successful. But as it stands, this is California's position. Contrast it with Colorado. Colorado, had the same type of thing to consider, and they came out a different way. In Colorado, they have explicitly said that you can put hemp-based CBD in food and beverage products. However, if you look at the footnotes, they're also saying, what I think is important as a regulatory lawyer, and I think most folks in the room who are trying to get into and build brands and do a degree of consumer disclosure, you have to be clear about what products you're using. You need to be clear about the THC levels, and you also have to have some clear labeling that this is not an FDA-approved product. So I also, because we're talking about cannabis, most folks talk about THC and they talk about CBD, but also I think it's important to note to the extent that folks might be interested in essentially the safest cannabis product that you can put lawfully under the federal regulations in food and beverage products, is that when the FDA came out with their frequently asked questions and their position on CBD, one of the things that they put forward is, hey, look, we're making this position on CBD, but we have essentially said that whole hemp seeds, hemp protein powder, hemp seed oil, that is actually products that we have generally recognized as safer grass, as products that you can put into food and beverage products. And as a result, those types of cannabis-derived products can go in to food and beverage. Obviously, you can see some, of the same requirements, which I don't think would be any surprise in terms of if you are using hemp seed or hemp seed oil, you need to make those disclosures. I work in the alcohol space, and it was interesting because I think 2 years ago, I was asked to give a presentation at the Brewers Association on cannabis and beer, and one of the main things at that time was CBD and beer. And the TTB, which is the regulatory agency that oversees alcohol, they have had a hemp policy for a number of years. And the hemp policy is essentially that if you can prove by laboratory analysis that the product that you're trying to put in alcohol is, I need to move away from this thing, is not, has low levels of THC, then that's allowed. And there were, particularly in beer, TTB was approving, prior to the 2018 Farm Bill, CBD-infused beers for those companies that had gone forward, had gone through the analysis, and had been able to prove to the TTB that yes, they had CBD in their beer, but it was purely hemp-based. However, TTB kind of got its hands forced with the passage of the Farm Bill and the FDA taking such a strong position against CBD being included as a food additive, and so it recently came out with a new circular that said, going forward, we're no longer going to allow for CBD in alcohol, reminding alcohol producers that even if you're just producing something that's just going to be sold at your tap room, and so in theory, there are ways in which those tap room beers don't actually have to go through certain TTB processes. You still have to go through the formulation, and if it's CBD, unless and until you can show us that the FDA is okay with what you're doing, the TTB has now taken a position that you can put CBD in alcohol, even if it meets the legal definition of hemp. So, current regulatory and enforcement considerations. As many of you know and may have even participated in or listened to, the FDA recognizes that it has a tremendous burden right now as a result of the passage of the Farm Bill on how does it enact its responsibility in terms of protecting public health with a clear message from Congress that Congress wants hemp-based products, including hemp-based CBD, to be legalized and to develop that marketplace, as well as the fact that there has been, essentially due to their lack of enforcement, a fully developed market for this product. And so the FDA conducted public hearings a few weeks ago. There were over 110 speakers. I think, each of them had, 10 minutes. It was a real whirlwind, 10 hours of testimony. The FDA is still receiving information in terms of submissions up until I think it's, July 2nd. And I wasn't able to listen to all 10 hours, but I did listen in. I've talked to several other folks who practice in my area. And these are some of sort of the main takeaways that I wanted to share with you all. First of all, the FDA takes seriously and has continued to take seriously the fact that the Farm Bill did preserve their jurisdiction. And so despite the pressure that they may feel from Congress or even from the industry right now, I think they are bolstered by the fact that that was an explicit carve out for them, that they have that authority and they're going to take their time to do what they feel is right under their jurisdiction in this industry. There's also been talk of, okay, well, how do we fix this? Can they issue a new regulation? That's been one of the things that's talked about to ease this tension between the fact that they have an FDA-approved drug and an Epidiolex with CBD, that they could just issue, easy enough, issue a new regulation, and they'll do that. And what the commissioner said was that in his view, this would be new terrain. And in truth, that's accurate. There's been one instance, it's like a rice yeast, where they actually did issue a new regulation to create sort of a pathway forward, but I would be personally very surprised if that was the pathway that they took here, despite people putting that forward as an option for them. One of the biggest things, FDA is looking for science, they're looking for data, and if you listen to what the feedback was when folks were giving testimonials and other things, they kept saying, what science do you have? What can you show me to support sort of how CBD works, how it interacts with other drugs, how we understand what the proper dosage is, sort of on down the line. And I think that's going to be one of the big challenges, is that, the truth is there wasn't the scientific data, because there couldn't be, because until the laws changed, there were very, very few entities that were allowed to study CBD. And so there is this void right now where we have to play catch up in order to get the information in front of the FDA that can make them feel comfortable that they understand what they're dealing with, and they can actually create regulations that are meaningful from a public health perspective, which is their charge, as opposed to just marketing and advertising. Again, sort of the point is that there was a lot of testimony about kind of in the marketplace that because it is unregulated, it's creating a lot of issues where you have products that are not what they say they are, right? There are products that say they are CBD oil, but when actually tested in a lab, didn't contain any CBD at all. They would say they had low THC levels, they didn't. They had all kinds of other adulterated products in them. And that was, that's something that's going to be a lot of concern for the FDA, and that's going to be one of their tension points, because while they're going to want to take that measured approach as get that science and get that information. I think that there was a strong showing from the industry, and particularly folks, who were both coming from the healthcare side, the scientific community, as well as people who really wanted to go forward in compliance and were doing the work themselves to make good products, to say, look, we need help, that you've got real issues with players who are just trying to make a quick buck. You need to step in, this is your authority, this is your charge to do something about it. So I think that message was heard. I'm not necessarily sure how to predict what they're going to do with it, but I think it was an important point and an important takeaway from those meetings. I think one of the things that, in terms of talking about that enforcement risk, certainly the FDA has been very clear in their guidance that they consider CBD to be an illegal food additive. However, they haven't done a lot about it. And that's always an issue where, sometimes you can say the laws are only as good as how they're enforced and when they're enforced. And the FDA is not doing themselves any favors in the fact that they're making these pronouncements, but by and large, the only actions that they've taken to date are to issue a couple of warning letters. However, for folks in the room, and I know it was mentioned earlier at one of our first presentations, if you are in the space and you're trying to do the best you can as far as at least not getting on the FDA's radar for CBD products in food and beverage, absolutely stay away from anything that makes health claims, because they've been consistent, and that's come through in multiple ways from the FDA, that what they're looking for, sort of top line priority, is health claims, what they call over-the-line claims, both explicit and implicit, right? So explicit would be, so it's on your label that you say this will, cure you of whatever ailment. However, if you have a website and if you look at the warning letters, these are some of the things that the FDA is drilling into. If you mention, on one pull-down tab, then one of the things is that this product, will help you with your sleep and you'll help you with anxiety. To the FDA, that's also making health claims. Wrong button. The other thing is that a lot of folks, or at least the folks that come to me, they're so concerned about the FDA, but the truth is that the FDA is really not the entity that's going to be a problem for anybody in this room or anybody who's getting into this. It's largely right now, enforcement is coming at the state and local level, and it's coming from those state departments of health. So, for example, the New York Department of Health, and earlier this year, they did a whole raid of restaurants in the city that were selling CBD-infused products. And they got some backlash for that, and they've sort of they did an embargo, they took all the products off the shelves, they told folks that, you can't do that anymore. They have at least come and said that they're not going to be issuing any sanctions or heavy fines, until October, so they're letting people get caught up. But within the city, that Department of Health they're going to be the front line in terms of folks that may be issues for anyone who has product out there. Maine was sort of an interesting story where they also came forward and took some products off the shelf, but then ended up enacting legislation, some emergency legislation to fix that. Ohio has also been reported to be pulling CBD products, and also some counties in Washington State. So, my point on this is, we can think about the FDA either negatively or positively in terms of coming forward and saying that they're clear about the food additives, but they're not actually doing very much about it. And so I think that can give some false confidence that, it's really an open market. However, I think there is going to continue to be stepped up enforcement from the state departments of health. And also, I gave you Colorado and California, but the truth is, most states have not been clear on their position, and that's difficult, both from industry folks and also, lawyers like myself to understand, okay, well, what is the position of Phil in the state about hemp-based CBD products in food and beverage? Sort of last point, and I touched on this earlier, is lawful sourcing, right? So people just sort of say, okay, well, hemp is now legal under the Farm Bill, but where can you get legal Farm Bill hemp? And as I noted earlier, where we are right now until the USDA comes out with its regulation and their state-approved plans within the U.S. And the former speaker made a good point about this, is that legalized hemp is only that which is grown in the U.S. It is not sourced outside. And because most states, while they had enacted plans and were starting to put those forward for 2014, a lot of them didn't, so you may have laws on the books, but you don't have a license structure, you haven't actually done anything, and so some states are on hold because they were just starting to roll out the programs for the 2014 Farm Bill. They get hit with the 2018 Farm Bill, and I'm like, okay, well, I'm going to wait and see what the USDA does. So I think that's it's a 0, so I'm out of time.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Thank you, Alva. And I'm sorry that we don't really have time to work the crowd for questions.
Yeah, no problem.
I just
you can find me later.
And thank you for sharing your time with us. I have one quick one while we bring up the next speaker, and that is, where's product liability in this on top of everything else?
So, it's interesting because Jeff shared that question with me last night, and I was like, ooh, that's a good question. I think the truth is that, product liability is going to be coming. If you practice in the food and beverage space, one of the main things that folks have been going after right now are food and beverage products, whether they be for false advertising, misleading labels. The class action bar is very active in the food and beverage space because they've been very successful. And I think as cannabis brands start to become, more mainstream, which of course, from an industry perspective, we want to see that, you're also going to start to have the possibility that you can become one of the targets in terms of, do you actually, is there a relationship between what you say is on your brand label and the fact that that's not actually what it says. And there's regulatory exposure, but there's also, to Jeff's question, there are private citizens who can create class actions against you as a result of that. And the other thing that I'll just mention is that one of the things I think that may potentially be coming down the pike is that competitors, they're large companies. I've got a very large food company who asked me to do an analysis on unfair competition because they're pissed off, to be candid, that they see their competitors getting into the CBD space. They're not doing it because, I'm telling them they can't do it, but they're like, that's just not fair. Can we sue them? And truthfully, they can, And so whether or not it's product liability, plaintiffs' class actions, or unfair competition lawsuits from competitors, it's going to become a more active litigation space.